talked in the last hour about the medical kidnapping of Justina Peltier in Boston by a hospital associated with Harvard. Marty Gottesfeld, of course, was just convicted, as I pointed out, of charges that he hacked a fundraiser by that hospital to draw attention to the medical kidnapping of Justina Peltier. I have on the line with me now Dwight Mitchell, and he's out of Minnesota. He has created a group to push back against the child kidnapping that people are not talking about. You know, I brought this up at the time the news had just broken about the children that were being separated from their alleged parents as they were crossing the border illegally. Some of them have been turned over to child traffickers. There has to be a determination as to whether or not they're even their parents are coming here from a foreign country. They are not even sure who they belong to, so they're doing DNA tests. The left is very upset about this. However, they're not talking about what's been going on with CPS for decades. And a lot of this is happening in Minnesota, where Dwight Mitchell is. He created an organization called Stop Child Protective Services from Legally Kidnapping Children. They filed a motion for a permanent injunction to immediately close CPS, calling the practices unconstitutional. And at the time I covered this, I read to you a lot of stories from a lot of different states where the children would be kidnapped and the parents were never given a search warrant. That they never got a search warrant. They said, we don't need a search warrant to come in here and do this. They were never given their due process. That's the whole point. There are situations where children are abused, but the parents need to have due process. You need to have due process. Every one of us needs to hang together and demand that we have due process. That is the theme, I guess, of this show today when we look at the corruption in the Justice Department system. But it is no worse than with CPS, because just like civil asset forfeiture, when they take your car, charge it with a crime, don't have to even charge you with a crime or find you guilty of anything. They take your property. Well, they take your children in the same way, and they've been doing that for decades. When is that going to stop? So joining us now is Dwight Mitchell. Again, the Stop CPS from Legally Kidnapping Children. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your particular story. How did you get involved in this?
Well, like most American citizens, I trusted Child Protection Services. I was working in Minnesota. I'm a management consultant. I was doing a very large $22 million project for CHS Corporation, installing a computer system. I take my family with me when I go on assignments. And my son was misbehaving terribly in Minnesota. And I did what I thought most parents did. I gave him an ordinary bottom spanking, just typical parental discipline.
Yep.
He told the babysitter, who contacted the police. The next thing I know, they had taken all three of my children out of my custody.
Wow. Wow. Just for a spanking. And again, no hearing to see whether excessive force was used or did they have a search warrant when they came for the children? How did that happen? Because that's a key part of the way these things typically go down.
Well, what's interesting is as my wife and I were out for dinner, so we weren't even home when this happened. We get a call from the police department telling us to come down to the station, that they have, all of the children, at the police station. And so we go down. I am immediately arrested for malicious punishment of a child and put in jail. My children are taken and put in foster care immediately. I did not have a hearing, as I was supposed to do in 72 hours. I had to wait 10 days before I even had my first hearing. At the hearing, there was no evidence. It was just purely social worker allegations and allegations from my former wife. And they took my children and kept the youngest for 5 months and the middle child for 22 months. During that entire time period, I had no contact whatsoever with my middle son. Wow.
Wow. So how did this eventually get resolved? Did they finally have a hearing after 22 months?
I became frustrated with the system. Initially, I was pushing back. I was arguing about my constitutionality and the things that were not taking place. Finally, I had an attorney I let my attorney go for ineffective counsel. I proceeded pro se. I filed 3 motions with the court. And once the judge heard all of my evidence and saw all of the lies and manipulation that CPS had done over the course of 22 months, my case was dismissed and my son was returned.
You know, it's absolutely amazing to me. What do you think about the fact that the media is constantly talking about separated children at the border, and yet for decades this kind of abuse has been conducted against American citizens, and they have remained absolutely silent about this? What do you make of the media's silence on CPS abuse? Because we see reports of this all the time given to us, but other press doesn't really talk about it much.
Well, one of the things I found interesting, and the main reason that I started the organization, is that I was trying to go through the legal channels. I was going through the chain of command. I was speaking before the legislature. I went to the Minnesota Task Force for Child Reform. I spoke to a number of senators and representatives, and nothing was happening. Everything was silent. It was as if there was this big, great elephant in the room, and no one was speaking about it. Even when I provided the evidence to the task force, to the police, to the media, everyone refused to speak about it. And I said, understood. I said, I'm going to do something about this. So I formed a parental rights group just to see how many other individuals were having the same issues that I was. Our group went from 250 people to over 3,600 people in less than 90 days.
Wow.
And so as I started talking to everyone and I started seeing what was going on, I came to understand that this was systemic across the nation. So what started out as me doing an investigation, because I'm a management consultant, so I do business process reengineering on a daily basis. So I started investigating CPS in Minnesota, and this expanded to a national sort of forensic study. And then after I finished the study, I determined that 465,000 children were removed nationally as of the last reporting, and over 2 million children have been forcibly removed from their families in the last 10 years. Initially, I went to 5, and there were over 5, and I said, well, let me see, how many children have been removed and placed in foster home in 10 years, and it was 2.9 million people. And so I said, okay, no one's reporting about this. They're talking about 10,000 children at the border when, they've taken 465,000 American children, and the media is silent on it.
Yes.
The hypocrisy was staggering.
Absolutely. And we're looking at this situation at the border. One of the reasons that they're holding these children there is because they're concerned about child trafficking. And that, in many of these stories, is a part of what CPS is doing. They don't vet a lot of these people that they turn them over to. That's another part of the tragedy that happens to these kids. And there is a lot of child trafficking that is happening with this, and that may be a part of why they're silent about it. Stay with us. We're going to talk to Dwight Mitchell a bit more about what's going on with CPS and his organization to try to stop this abuse. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. I'm talking to Dwight Mitchell. After his family was broken up for 22 months by CPS without getting due process, Dwight Mitchell started talking to other parents. He started an organization. It exploded, as you heard him say in the last segment. This organization is Stop CPS from Legally Kidnapping Children. If you want to find them on Twitter, let me give you the how you can find them. It is SCPSLKC. That's S as in stop, then CPS, and then LKC as in Legally Kidnapping Children. Again, you can also find their website, the same initials, SCPSLKC.org. You can find their website if you want to help them do this. He is on a mission to try to wake up the public, because you know what, folks? The Justice Department and the bureaucracies are not really interested. We see, regardless of the issue, regardless of whether it is urban or rural, people are not getting due process. And it's because you have these bureaucracies that are acting in their own self-interest. They might lock people up because they have a political difference with them. They want to make a point about something on the internet or whatever. But they're also acting in their own self-interest, not in the public interest. And this is very apparent with CPS. In one of these cases, it was basically justified on medical grounds. This lady in this article out of Minnesota, Amanda Weber, she took her son to the hospital with a cough. The doctor does some tests, said, all right, I think they're okay. Can I take him home? Because she had other kids waiting. Said, no, we don't need to do any more tests. In a couple of days, the doorbell rings. It's the cops. They say, we got to see your kid at the doctor again. We're concerned about his welfare. She goes down there. They've already got a foster parent waiting to take her child. And she said this. She said, CPS can't even start collecting the money until the child is taken out of the home, put into foster care. Then they can start billing a minimum of one social worker a month and one supervisor a month per child. Follow the money. Follow the money. And there are other self-interests that these people have as well. But Dwight, I want you to talk to people about what they can do. How can they help you? How can they find your organization? This has to be something that comes from the people, a grassroots rising, because the system is not going to reform itself. We've seen that too many times.
This is true. You just mentioned Amanda Weber. She is the first case that we've undertaken pro bono as an organization. So we are covering all of Amanda's expenses as it relates to the litigation. We have started a national fundraiser that actually kicked off yesterday. We have a Facebook group for victims, as I mentioned before, that has over 3,600 people. We have a Facebook page also. We are in the process of implementing a nationwide strategic litigation strategy that's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. We have determined that that is the only way that we're going to get justice. Once I went through the statistics, and which are all on my website. So anything that I tell you today, please don't take my word for it. I actually went to all the federal websites. I put in the links, a graph on our mission that talks about the abuse that happens in foster care, so that everything that you see is from an official website. So when I look at the United States government's website in Washington, and I'm looking at the figures, I'm like, well, why is no one acting on these figures? And then I came to realize it's a $29 billion machine. And the machine,
there you go, that's it, bingo. $29 billion machine, political machine, acting in its own interest.
That's correct. So if you extrapolate that, that means that $290 billion has gone into this machine in the last 10 years. And no one wants to dismantle it. So that machine is self-protecting. CPS has actually drafted the legislation. They become so powerful. In Minnesota, they're the fourth largest agency in all of Minnesota. They're a power unto themselves. And so they have drafted the legislature carefully. So what we have determined is the only way we're going to get justice is to go into all 50 states, put in federal cases regarding the unconstitutionality of the statutes, that they are taking children without showing any harm, and I'm going to use their own figures against them. I'm going to show them, I said, based upon the reports that you, the states, reported to the government, 84% of the children you remove have no harm whatsoever. So you're sitting here saying you're spending $290 billion over the last 10 years when there's no harm to the children? I'm like, please help me understand that. I'm like, there is no sane, rational basis for taking families' children. So what they're doing now, which has become even more apparent, they're attacking the middle class. And even the rich, they're not safe any longer. But when it comes to the payments from the Title IV-E, American Indians, they receive 100% funding. So anytime they take an American Indian child out of the household, the federal government will reimburse the state 100%. Having said that, Minnesota now is the #1 state as it relates to Indian child removals. So they take more Indian children than any other state. They get 50% for all other child removals. What they have determined is, well, if I only get 50% reimbursement from the federal government and the poor people cannot afford to reimburse me, I need to start going after the middle class, because we have legislation in place that says you can charge the families for all services provided by the state. So now the state is getting 100% for both Native American and all of the children are targeting the middle class and the rich. And most people just pay it because they want their children back, so they're being held hostage. And CPS is forcibly doing whatever they want to do to these families, and they're elongating and extending the time frames so they can continue to receive the funds. So there's these guidelines that are put in place.
That's amazing. And you know, when you look at this and the age that we live in, we have seen so many people get into trouble because of some innocent picture that they put up on Twitter or on Facebook that is misconstrued and a complaint is filed. And then CPS begins on their kidnapping quest. You have to prove that there was nothing there. You have to pay them, and you don't get any due process. You have to fight them in court. They shut down the typical due process, the presumption of innocent until proven guilty, because they want to kidnap your kids. They want to get that money. And everybody is really at risk with this. So many people think, oh, this just happened to me. That's why your organization is so valuable, because you're getting people together and saying, hey, look, this is a pattern of abuse here from CPS that is not only within this community, but nationwide.
That is correct. And what most people don't understand, and I didn't understand it until recently, I call myself being compliant, thinking that, okay, if I do what they say, this is all a mistake, I'm a good parent, great house, make a lot of money, I'll get my kid back immediately. Well, that was not the case. CPS didn't adhere to one of their guidelines. So there's state mandates for timeframes, and CPS did not follow one of them. Then I started analyzing, well, why would you not do what you're doing? The billing came out again. But one of the most important things that I've told everyone who has joined the organization, especially the new families, is do not cooperate with CPS. And when I say do not cooperate with them, they have 90 days to do an assessment. They are going to try and interview you, the doctors, the families, anybody they can to build a case. When they start, all they have is allegations. They have no proof. So without you, they cannot conduct their assessment. So I tell everyone, don't sign any of their forms. They must give you visitation by state law, and do not help them convict you, because that is essentially what they're doing.
Wow, that is very, very important advice. It's very important for people to understand the risk, because if they haven't come after you or somebody that you know, you are very much at risk in this age where so much of everybody's private life is on the internet, and you never know how it's going to be misconstrued. Again, we have Dwight Mitchell. You can find him on Twitter, S as in stop, SCPS LKC. You can find that on Twitter. Actually, I'm going to put that link on my account so you can find that organization. Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. We're going to have you back on. I want to keep updated as to what is happening with this organization. Very important. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and I wanted to hold over Dwight Mitchell one more segment. He graciously consented to do that. This is a very important topic, as he was talking about $29 billion a year. $290 billion over the last decade has been spent by the federal government. You heard him say that they get 100% reimbursement for Indians. And if you're middle class, they can come after you so they can pay for the kidnapping of your child. It's just absolutely amazing when you look at the money here. But I want to talk about some other issues here from the child's perspective. I mean, we've been looking at this from the parents' perspective, having their children taken away, not getting due process, being shut down, ignored by the bureaucracy, by the Justice Department, not having your day in court, having that delayed for a long period of time. Dwight's son was taken for 22 months before he was able to get that back, just based on accusations. And we know how easy it is for people to be falsely accused in this day and age of the internet and Facebook and so forth. We should all be very concerned about this. We should all be very concerned about due process. It's being shut down everywhere we look on every type of issue, but especially when it comes to our children. It's far worse than them coming in and stealing your car or even your house when they steal your children. And that is what's happening here for their own financial benefit, just as we've seen the police departments with civil asset forfeiture. They grab all that money in cash that they sell this stuff for, that they steal, and use it on themselves and use it on their department, build their bureaucracy. Well, the same thing is happening with CPS. So I wanted to talk to Dwight about it from the perspective of the children, about what happens to them in foster homes, what happens to them in group homes. Whereas Julian, one of our crew here, was saying he knows from firsthand experience about some of these group homes where the children who are seized out of a home where eventually, many cases, you find there wasn't any problem. But they're put into a group home with some kids who, in many cases, are hardened juvenile delinquents who are abusing the other kids along with them. But then we have abusive foster parents that the CPS brings into the system that they don't properly vet their background as well. Your comments, Dwight?
Well, it's funny you should mention this, because this is one of the primary reasons that I actually started to move forward. I looked at the trauma that was inflicted on my children when they returned. My children ran away from home. They kept asking to come home. CPS wouldn't allow them to come home. And then when I started looking at statistics for foster care in America, I was just amazed, appalled, not amazed, but rather appalled at statistics. So, you know, each year they release about 25,000 children back into society. They call it aging out of the system. But when you look at the statistics on an annual basis, 55% of the girls in foster care are pregnant before the age of 19.
Wow.
The number of foster children that age out of the system without a high school diploma is 50%. You know, 40% of the foster children that were in foster care are either dead or in jail within 1 year of aging out of the system. 20% of the children are homeless immediately when they age out. Only 3% of the children that are in foster care go to college. 50% are incarcerated within 2 years. 74% of the former foster children are incarcerated. And 80% of the inmates on death row were former foster care children. So what that's saying to me is the people that are in charge of protecting our children and providing for their safety and their education are actually the child abusers, because they're putting them in these situations where they are destined to fail, and there's the outlook and the future is bleak for these children. And as you were saying before, many are sexually abused and assaulted. And just recently, the Children's Defense Fund sent a letter to Congress where 540 healthcare professionals and agencies across the United States said that separating children from their families creates traumatic, lifelong injuries. This is also on my website. There is a wealth of information on the website with direct links to all of the information that I just discussed today. Official.
Let's give that website again. The organization is Stop CPS from Legally Kidnapping Children. So you got the initials there, S as in stop, then CPS, and then LKC. So it's scpslkc.org. Also the same initials on Twitter. That's amazing. 80% of the people on death row came out of this system. Only 3% who come out go to college, and all those other statistics that you got about drug abuse and failure and early pregnancies and so forth, they are destroying these children when they take them.
They're doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the thing that's so disparaging, David, is that the government knows this is happening. Outside of the what I call legal kidnapping, they have been getting these foster care figures for over 20 years. I went back to 1999, David. You know, back in the 90s, they were taking, over 500,000 children a year. So, this is all known. The disparity in the system is known. 50% of the children in foster care are minorities, African Americans. But now, and when I say 50%, I'm talking about from a disparate position, meaning 12% of the population is African American, yet 50% of the children are African American.
Yeah.
And while from a percentage perspective, this isn't about race to me, and so you won't really see race on my website a lot, because initially I thought it was race related. They're targeting the minorities and American Indians, Native Americans, things of that nature. But then once I started looking at it, they're doing this to everyone, and they've been doing this for a very, very long time. They're very good at separating children from their families.
That's right. It's very important for everybody to stick together and not say, well, this isn't my problem. This is this other group's problem, because you know what? When they're finished with that other group, they're going to come for you. That's what Pastor Martin Niemöller pointed out about the Nazis. He said, they came after that group. I didn't do anything because I wasn't one of them. Then they went after that group. I wasn't one of them. And then when they came after me, there was nobody left because I hadn't stood up for anybody. But the bottom line is that they're just coming after the low-hanging fruit. They're coming after people that they feel aren't going to really be able to fight back. They're not going to have the financial resources, because we see that with the so-called civil asset forfeiture, where they take people's property. They go after the poor people because they know they don't have the resources to fight them in court, and that's why they're going after the kids that way as well.
That is correct, 100% correct. And so one of the reasons we took on Amanda's case is that, you know, Amanda, when we looked at it from a medical neglect situation, we're like, okay, she takes a child in for a cough. You know, this stemmed from vaccination, her not wanting to get her son vaccinated. When you look at the medical reports, we have people calling because their child is outside playing without them. I have another member who was sitting on the porch while her daughter was riding the bike up and down the sidewalk by herself. The neighbors called. The neighbors need to stop calling CPS unless you know for sure that that child is being abused, or you see that child outside 3 or 4 times, you know, by themselves, or hungry, or dirty, or fight. Then you can call CPS. But you need to be a neighbor first. You need to walk down the street and say, hey, I found your little girl down here. You know, you may not be aware, you know, that she was down the street. You know, find out what's going on. Be a neighbor.
We've turned into a nation of snitches, haven't we? I mean, everybody informing on each other. It's like East Germany. It's unbelievable what happens. And kids can't play outside anymore. There was just a report saying kids typically only get outside 7 hours a week. I'm surprised it's that much, quite frankly. They want them inside, and then if they're inside and on Facebook, they can find something to object to that they posted on Facebook to come take the kids. It's absolutely insane what we've turned into here. And it's the destruction of the family, isn't it, Dwight? Because when you look at this and you look at that whole litany of statistics that you had there, all the different ways in which these kids who've been taken away from their homes, had the homes, the parents removed from them, all the different ways that they have failed, every possible metric that you could have of failure, and look at how it soars here when you destroy the family. And that's what our society is focused on in every regard. The family is vilified everywhere. Fathers are vilified everywhere. They want the kids, they want to take them away, and it destroys the children's lives.
It's gotten to the point that in Minnesota last year, they enacted new laws, and they took 10,000 more children out of the household last year than the prior year. And I'm like, what is going on? This is madness. It's just utter madness.
It's accelerating. All right, we're right here to the break, so I want to give out your website one more time. It's Stop CPS from Legally Kidnapping Children. Use the initials S, CPS, LKC.org, and the same initials on Twitter. I will tweet that out on my account. This is something we all need to wake up to. We need to stand. Look, folks, freedom is never given. It is only taken. Due process is never given. It's only taken. It was always juries that gave us our freedoms. It wasn't the politicians or the king. Thank you so much, Dwight Mitchell. We'll be right back.